our next session on transformational solutions, we're moving away from floods and droughts, and we're moving on to bushfires. And that slide. Oh, hang on, this slide. And so I think all of you who were here in the first session would have seen me present a lovely little cartoon about our aspirational goal is to try and detect these bushfires within 1 minute in deep remote forest, and to try and put them out within 5 minutes. Now that is an aspirational goal, and it'd be fantastic if we could achieve that. But we have a team of researchers at ANU with partners who are actually trying to get there. And so what I'm going to do now is introduce you to, quickly, so you know where they kind of fit in and what they're trying to do. So first of all, we're going to hear from, so basically, if you want to put fires out, you first of all got to try and make the forest as risk-free as possible. And second of all, as we heard that 80 to 90% of these fires are started from lightning, you need to be able to find that lightning and go and see if there's an ignition. And then you need to be able to find ignitions. And Rob Mahony is going to give you a long 6-minute talk about how ANU, the ANU-Optus Bushfire Research Centre of Excellence, is finding those ignitions. Phil Zylstra, who works with David Lindenmayer at ANU, is going to talk about how to prevent and reduce the risk in the forest of ignition. And Colleen is going to tell you everything she knows about lightning. And then Rob's also going to talk about some really exciting research that we've been doing at ANU with students. I keep going on about students, but they really are amazing to work with, where they've been developing some water gliders that can actually potentially put these fires out within a few minutes. So I think I'm supposed to introduce all the people, and I don't have my notes in front of me. So our first speaker is Colleen Bryant, who will talk about her lightning fire research. Thanks, Colleen.
So as Roslyn mentioned, today I'm going to talk about lightning fires and a project that aims to put them out, to reduce their impact through early detection. But first, to acknowledge all the partners, and there's a lot of them. Fire Neural Networks, who's a Florida-based company, Western Sydney University, ACT, RFS, New South Wales, RFS, ACT Parks, NSSN. Sorry. So as Roslyn mentioned, lightning accounts for about 80 to 90% of the area burned in Southeast Australia, and is the principal cause of very large fires. I don't have to spell out to you the destruction or the resources they require, because you remember. Roslyn mentioned a figure of $20 billion as the damage, but the estimated total impact, some people place at about 100 billion. And the cost to the environment is immeasurable. The challenges, the solution is really obvious, right? If we know where the lightning occurs, you just go and find it and you put out the fire. Well, it's not quite that simple. Fire managers already use lightning strike data to guide their searches. But as you can imagine, there's thousands and thousands of lightning strikes. And using current technologies, we don't know which one or how many they're likely to be. There could be 1, there could be 100. Or if you're in the US, there could be 500. Sorry. Then there's the complexity of the ignition itself, where a lightning strike can strike a tree, travel down the tree, start a fire in the forest fuels on the floor, and then spread from there. But as I've shown in these slides, it's also possible for that fire to reside within a tree and only spread out at some point in time, either when the tree topples or the wind picks up, maybe a day, maybe hours, maybe rarely several months later. So despite all of our searching, we may not be aware that an ignition has taken place. And it's only at some later point in time when the fire flares up that it's spotted. Under adverse, the smoke may only be detected when that fire flares up hours, as I mentioned, or days later. Under adverse conditions, that escalation in fire activity can be so rapid that by the time the smoke is spotted, effectively it's already too late to successfully contain and suppress that fire. So we can drastically improve early detection if we do two things. We can identify the lightning strikes that are likely to cause a fire, because that means that we have to look for less of them. And secondly, if we improve the accuracy of those lightning strikes, we decrease the search area. So for example, if you have an error of 250 metres and you decrease that down to 50 metres, the search area decreases from 20 hectares down to less than 1. And for those people who can't picture hectares, that's like equivalent of searching about 16 house blocks instead of 390 per strike. Our collaborator, Viral Neural Networks, has developed a novel and multifaceted approach that addresses some of these requirements. It includes an innovative lightning detection system that is capable of recognising the specific parts of the lightning signal that are associated with that component that causes the fire. And through complex analytical techniques, you combine that with the environmental data to select out the high-risk lightning. And they tell us that the location of that can be down to 50 metres. They're actually aiming for 30. And that knowledge of the high-risk lightning is available in under a minute. So what does that look like? This is from the ANU complex in California. Little blue dots show all of the lightning strikes, 6,000 of them. And based on their analysis, FNN were able to pick out 26 high-risk lightning strikes. And at that point in time, that technology, that information wasn't available to fire services. Some of those fires took up to 24 hours to detect. LNU is like the 6th largest fire in US history. 6 of these 26 actually started a fire. In this project, we're aiming to trial this technology in the ACT for the first time. It'll consist of 6 detectors that cover most of the ACT. However, this is more than a demonstration project. It's important to understand how Australia's unique forest environments influence the possibility or the probability of ignition, and to modify those algorithms accordingly. ANU, through the ANU-Optus Bushfire Centre for Excellence and other research initiatives, is a leader in the development and applications of novel remote sensing technologies for the characterizations of fuel moisture, fuel loads and structure. And we are amply complemented by our Western Sydney University colleagues' expertise in similar fields. By combining our collective knowledge, efforts and resources, this project aims to bring about a transformational change to assist Australia in reducing the impacts of large lightning fires. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colleen. So now we know how to find where to look for the ignitions. Rob is going to tell us how the ANU Bushfire Research Centre of Excellence is going to find those ignitions. So thank you, Rob.
Thanks. Yes, so I was asked to talk about the Optus Bushfire Centre of Excellence, as well as the things that we're doing. This slide here is just a useful one to focus on for a moment. It shows the drone that we've been working on. So that's an existing research project that we're working on. And particularly, this is a technology that we're trying to develop for validation of ignitions. So once there's been a lightning strike that's been detected, we don't want to deploy resources on every single lightning strike that's been detected, even when they're high risk. So we're proposing a technology where you'd have a fleet of drones that would be flying after you'd only put them up during a dry thunderstorm or at a high risk period. And then what would happen is that they would be targeted with every one of these ignitions and then potential ignitions, and then they would go and they would validate whether there'd been an ignition or not. What we've got here is on the top right view, yes, there's a picture of Spring Valley Farm where we're doing the demonstration work, and we've been flying the drone over that, and there's actually the thermal camera image of a lit fire there that we're detecting. And so we're working on automating all of that and providing that sort of data. So that's sort of an indication of what we're doing. I was asked to just sort of talk about the Optus Bushfire Centre of Excellence. So this is a $5 million 7-year research project that is based here in an ANU in concert with Optus, and we've got a set of partners there working into the Centre of Excellence. Colleen's project is part of that. I forgot to put down Western Sydney, so I apologise for that at the moment, but it's a very exciting process to be part of, and unfortunately the Director Marta can't be here today to talk about it. And just to reinforce some of what Roslyn's been saying, what we're really looking at here is paradigm change in the way that fires are being fought. And we're a research organisation, we're not a company and we're not a government. So it's not our job to deploy technology. And so what we see ourselves doing is through forums like this, setting public expectations. We are doing projects, but only to demonstrate technology, not to actually develop deployable technology. And then what we will be doing is open sourcing all of the IP from this sort of technology, setting standards and regulations and evaluating performance of technology. So we don't do deployment. We don't pick the winners and losers. That's for the governments to do. The scope of the Centre of Excellence is aligned with the scope of the Bushfire Initiative. So that's the range of activities that we're doing. And I guess one of the areas where we've really invested so far is in this ignition detection sort of side of things following on. And so just to give you a bit of a feel for the way we think about this, so we're thinking about a layered technology solution. And so if you think from up in the sky running down to the ground, you've got satellites, and we have a number of projects looking at satellite technology, and particularly for understanding moisture levels, foliage contents, and being able to have data available to model fires, model ignitions and model fires when they're actually occurring. The sort of satellite systems we're looking at are low Earth orbit satellites. They're not always looking at the surface of the Earth. They're circling over the Earth, so they cross Australia in a regular pattern every 95 minutes or something like that. So you don't get instantaneous data, but you do get very detailed information about some of these parameters that allow you to predict fires and understand fires. We're also looking at the high-level geostationary satellites, but they are very much further away. And so the nature of the sensors that you can actually deploy are different. And of course, satellites don't look through clouds. So then we're looking at the FNN networks and the electronic networks that allow you to understand about lightning strikes and understand where there might be high risks of ignitions. Underneath those, you have the airborne drones that I showed you the slides at the start. So the idea is that they're going to be able to overfly potential ignitions and validate so that you know you have something that you have to deal with. And so that it's worth deploying the technology to do that. And the idea would be that you can overfly a potential ignition within 5 minutes or even faster of the actual lightning strike occurring, because the drones would be following right in behind the storm. Then we've got a layer which is cameras in towers. This is an established technology in the States and a technology which is being rolled out here in Australia as well. And they have the advantage that they can survey an area where you've had a potential ignition for some time and pick up these cases that Colleen was talking about, where you might have a fire inside a tree or something like that then starts to ignite later on. And often when that happens, the conditions aren't so bad. And so you've got time to get out there as long as you learn about it fast enough. And the final layer is actually ground-based sensors, so Internet of Things, ad hoc networks, which can be deployed in emergency situations, which can be deployed around populated areas and can provide very detailed situational awareness of fires, of heat levels, of wind levels, of moisture levels in the air, of smoke levels and things like that. And these are all technologies that can contribute to the approach. And our goal really is to demonstrate these technologies and show their applicability and develop technology that will open source and enable Australian industry. So the other thing that I was asked to talk about is a project which is actually unfunded at the moment, if anybody would like to give us $1 million. So this is around the concept of control of remote bushland fires. And so if you think about what's going on here is we're building a technology base that I've just talked about, which enables us to identify ignitions and validate ignitions. So now let's imagine that we've found there's been a dry thunderstorm and there are 6 ignitions in the Blue Mountains in an area, and it's a critical period, and we would like to actually stop those ignitions from turning into a major bushfire. So it's very difficult to use existing technology, aerial water bombing and remote area fire teams to actually manage that sort of a scenario where there's multiple ignitions across a reasonably large area, and you don't have a lot of information about it yet, except for where the ignition is. So the raft team will not be deployed until people can be really confident that there's no risk to the firefighters that they're deploying there. And aerial bombing is sort of inefficient. So what we're looking at is a concept of a water glider. So a very large plane that would be carrying maybe 20 tons of water in 20 or 40 deployable units. So the prototype on the bottom left there is one that it's actually only 1 litre of water that we dropped out of a quadrotor just to sort of demonstrate the initial capability. And the idea would be that they'd actually be GPS guided and you could actually put water exactly onto the ignition. Now, we're not claiming that you would necessarily extinguish or suppress an ignition, but what we do think you could do is actually control an ignition. So you could stop these things growing quickly, even in bad conditions. Hopefully you could stop them growing. And if you continued to deploy suppressant on them over a period of time, you'd have time to get the raft team in, get all of the evidence together. So the concept there would be fast, cheap, flexible, all weather, day and night, and be able to get out and do something about some of these problems. And that was all I had. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rob. And I should have said that Rob is a professor in the ANU School of Engineering, and he's also the Deputy Director of the ANU-Optus Bushfire Research Centre of Excellence. So thank you, Rob. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Phil Zylstra. Phil is an Adjunct Associate Professor at the School of Molecular and Life Sciences at Curtin University and a Research Associate at the Evolution and Ecology Research Centre at the University of New South Wales. And he's going to talk to us about, well, his research is on the drivers of fire behaviour and the way that these translate into decision-making concepts, such as the risk or notion of flammability. You know, we've been trying to look at how to detect these ignitions in forests. If Phil's work was perfect, we wouldn't have any ignitions in forests and the lightning just wouldn't cause them, but I don't think it's that easy. But thanks, Phil.
Great to be here. Yes, I've been working also with Professor David Lindenmayer and Marta Yebra here. So that's what brings me into this context here. And my goal is not so much to stop ignitions from happening, because they always will happen. But I've come from a background in fire management and raft firefighting, remote area firefighting. And there are certain perspectives that I took from that to start with. The idea of fire management is the idea that you can alter the flammability of a forest, that you need to step in and intervene in that forest and reduce the flammability of that forest there. What I've been looking at is a concept of cooperation. In the cooperation idea recognizes that forests have actually existed here since Gondwana. And during that time, they've managed to maintain very, very fire sensitive species that have lasted over millions of years without our intervention, without our help. And there's also another fact that a lot of those species are disappearing now that we're helping them. So part of that issue is climate change. But just covering this briefly then, we need to understand what drives fire, what makes a forest flammable. Now, my my work on this has been to develop what is still the only peer-reviewed fire behaviour model for most forests across Australia. And it takes quite a different approach than we're used to hearing about. We've probably heard a lot of language about fuel load as a simple catch-all concept that was adopted from the US in the 1960s. We can go a little bit further than that. So yes, fuel drives fire. To start with, you need some fuel on the ground, generally a layer of leaf litter for a fire to spread, but you can't get big flames or fast flames with that. To get big or fast flames, you need plants. And when you have more plants, you get bigger, faster flames. But that's not the only influence of plants. You'll notice in the background here that in this forest, the trees are not on fire, yet those trees are actually influencing that fire behaviour. They're actually slowing that fire down. They're not silent bystanders. And the reason for that is if you think about standing in a paddock on a windy day, your hat could blow off your head. But if you're stepping under the trees, you've got less wind blowing on you. And this is the effect of trees. If any vegetation over your head is slowing the wind speed down, and we can call that overstory shelter. The wind is the biggest factor of the weather that drives a fire to become an uncontrollable feature. So vegetation that isn't burning is not fuel, it's overstory shelter. So plants can either accelerate a fire or slow it down. Now, that brings us to an interesting concept here, because the reason that these mid-story plants here were able to ignite was because there were a layer of shrubs underneath them that gave them a larger flame. If, however, we were able to take away that layer of shrubs, we would find that the flame there wouldn't be enough to ignite the taller mid-story plants there. Because what we've done is we've created a gap that flame can't cross. We've taken plants that were fuel and turned them into overstory shelter. And because they're overstory shelter, they're not innocent bystanders, they're actually slowing the fire down beneath them. So there are these processes that make a forest less flammable. And these things actually tend to happen by themselves through what are called ecological controls. And just looking at two of those very briefly, the first and probably the most influential is self-thinning. That straight after a fire, you get a lot of germination of plants, a lot of dense cover of plants close to the ground where they're easily ignitable. Over time, these grow larger. Some of them eventually overtop the lower strata of plants. And as a result, they start to outcompete them. And so, as you can see in this situation, we don't get ferns growing underneath these mid-story plants because they're outcompeted. So we've lost that layer of fuel underneath the mid-story plants. That's meant that there's a smaller pulse of heat going up to those mid-story plants. The next thing that happens is called self-pruning. And as you can see in this young blue gum, there's a lot of dead branches up the stem there. And that tends to happen with plants that the branches that are older and less productive down lower in the plant will die and will drop off. And that again increases the gap between these strata. So over time, a forest actually changes, passes through a period of very high flammability and passes on into a stage where it's less flammable. And just looking at an example of that, this is an area of red tingle forest we've been studying in southwestern Australia. And from the left to the right, we're looking at a time sequence from straight after fire, where you can see some epicormic growth on the trees, a period of very dense understory regrowth, which then self-thins. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a much more open understory fire. Now, to take that from a conceptual thing to one of ecological cooperation, we need to see how that translates into fire behaviour. And that's where I bring in FRAME, which will give us very concrete fire behaviour predictions, such as the percentage of the time that you can use aggressive fire fighting techniques rather than having to fall back to back burning. Yeah, so that there are two periods of that. There's either a very short period straight after fire or a very long period. And this allows us to plan our landscape planning around this. And there's a lot more that I could go into that, but I'll leave that for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Phil. That was really interesting, and perhaps isn't quite the sort of thoughts that people have when they think about what causes fires to start and spread in forests, where we just kind of think, well, if there's lots of fuel and we get rid of the fuel, then we can not have the fire. So I'm sure that people might have questions to better understand Phil's research. And I invite the speakers to come and sit with me down here and respond to some questions, both from the online audience and the in-room audience. Well, when you answer questions, you'll just have to come and stand up here.
Or there will be a microphone coming across.
There's one coming over your way. Okay, so, I already have a question at the back of the audience up here, and I've got some online. So how about someone right up the back up here?
No, so the water glider idea, actually, one of the real advantages is you can deploy it in any condition at all. So the actual main vehicle that would fly would be a PC-4 Orion or some similar large plane, and they can fly in any conditions as long as they're flying up high. So we'd be looking at flying these things at 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet. So reasonably well above where all of the main problems are. The actual water gliders itself would then effectively, they're like a bomb, right? They fly straight down and they've got GPS control. The actual challenge of making them fly through really difficult conditions is a significant challenge. But we're up for it. We can make these things do what we want them to do. And the point is that if you can actually time the parachute exactly, you can actually get to the point where they're bursting under the canopy, if that's what you want them to do. So the parachute can almost be caught in the canopy of the trees, and the suppressant can actually burst onto the ground down below the canopy, so that you're not losing a lot of that suppressant into the canopy. And of course, that's all a kinetic burst as well. So that's the sort of the idea. There's two things. One is the ability to fly in those sort of conditions. And the planes that have been lost, the water bomber that was lost was actually flying quite low and got caught in an eddy that was actually associated with the fire. So you wouldn't have any of that sort of risk. The other advantage is that you can actually have 6 ignitions nearby, and you can drop 6 of these water gliders out in the one pass across the area, right? You just time them as they drop out the back of the Orion, and the Orion can fly from one end of Brindabellis to the other in 4 minutes. So you really can cover a lot of ground. Thank you.
There's a question over here. Cherie? Yeah.
This is a question for Phil. In your graph, it takes, thank you. It takes, I guess, at least 50 years for the forest to be at that optimal mitigation state. So are you identifying ways to accelerate that, or how we can reduce that time period to get there?
Yeah, I suppose the short answer is that so far from what I've seen, any efforts to accelerate it actually complicate it and slow it down, because if you say, for example, manually come in and thin plants, you reduce the amount of biomass that's there. And so new plants then restart from the ground. whereas natural self-thinning happens because there is enough biomass already there overhead to outcompete this. So these are the constraints. This is how the natural system works. And what we're stuck with then, I suppose, is about rethinking our approach to how to manage landscape risk, how to age certain areas, how to, I suppose, prioritize areas that are getting closer to that age, how to use areas that are within that age and understand the limits of fire suppression within them. So the final graph that I showed that you could pick the weather conditions really where you'd be able to use more direct attack techniques with fire. And the same will go for these new technologies of identifying these envelopes when we can most effectively use these technologies and when perhaps they might be wasted efforts because the fire could have already gotten out of control. So it's more about recognizing these are the constraints of the natural world. So how do we cooperate with these and facilitate them to move on?
So I have a question up the back here, and then I've got a few on the screen from online. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, all of you. And thank you, Phil. My question's for you. I suppose what you just said about the use of your research is somewhat answers this question, but you called your talk working with country. And so, you know, it struck me listening to what your findings are and how you spoke about those, that the story of what it is to work with country is actually very complex. You know, there were times when there weren't humans managing these ecosystems, and that sort of self-thinning dynamic was there. And then there were tens of thousands of years where there were humans, and then there was a few hundred years where there were other humans doing very different things. How much I'm sure it's in the back of your mind all the time, you know, what it means to do effective fire management, and how much is the First Nations story, which the title of your talk, you know, partly evokes, a part of your thinking, and how to sort of reconstruct what it is to work with country effectively and understand, you know, the dynamics of whether you want to do frequent cool burning, whether that's the same as the kind of cool burning that is done today, or very different, you know, when you want to leave ecosystems alone to mature for 50 years and so on.
Yeah, I did pick the name Cooperation with Country with that in mind, because I was very much inspired at the beginning by a couple of different elders who I can't say I learnt huge amounts from. I wish I had spent more time with them, but I learnt enough to give me certain perspectives on it, and I've continually looked for more of those over time. And the approach, I suppose, that I have picked up is that these people didn't see themselves as managers of the country. They weren't there to be the top of the pyramid. They were there to cooperate with the other species that were there, and still do that in many parts of the country. And so a lot of the Australian myth of Aboriginal fire is that it was just this simple burning of country across large areas. And so each time we try to burn large areas of country, and we get another fire come through, there's always this idea, well, maybe we just didn't burn as much with our helicopters and you know, aerial drip torches and machines as people did with fire sticks on foot. And you know, the perspective is entirely different. It wasn't about trying to change the whole landscape. And traditional fire management is very much about only taking the bit that you need. So you, again, have intensive fire management along certain travel lines or in places that you have designated. And if you look at now at people trying to restore that traditional fire to parts of Eastern Australia, for example, the level of care of lighting a point, of watching to see if insects are moving faster than the fire spread in some cases, you know, of controlling it with branches. We can't do that around every incendiary we drop from a helicopter. So, it's a totally different way of thinking this. It's not about getting country burnt to change it. It's about having areas that we have strategically modified where that's valuable, and then leaving the broad landscape to operate with its own ecological controls.
So we have one question here that kind of relates to that, and then we'll go to Jason over here. So there's a question from Jess Moore about how important forest management is to managing fire risk and the role of Indigenous fire practices in contributing to fire risk management today. So it kind of follows on from what you were saying, but I just thought you might want to expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, I suppose just to clarify a couple of points there. Firstly, Aboriginal fire use. I don't think it's really, it turns into a form of cultural appropriation. I think if we try to take that and use that to say, let's save our cities from fire, that's not a traditional use of Aboriginal fire. We've got to recognise that it was not about enabling our lifestyles. So we don't want to co-opt it that way. And we don't want to ask that of it. Having said that, there will certainly be benefits that we can learn from it. And a lot of the time is that I think what we need to be doing is to not trying to jam it into our existing systems, but to stop and listen and recognise that it's an entirely different thing that's happening there. And perhaps we can fit with that. As far as broader fire management goes, a lot of our efforts, I talked a bit too long earlier on in the thing and didn't get into the final example there, but there was a study I looked at in Western Australia where the approach has been far more prescribed burning than we're able to do here, because you're dealing with very flat landscapes intersected by a lot of roads, easy access and easy to burn. And the net result of that has been to keep the forest there aged right in the period of the most flammable regrowth. So you've got 2/3 of the forest aged where the shrub cover is most dense. And this is the problem with trying to manage large landscapes as if we have that much power. So I suppose what we need to do is to take the bits that we are directly going to intervene with and pull back to the areas that we can manage around urban fringes, around places where there is a strategic spot where you will actually put firefighters right where you can really make use of that very recently burnt country, and leave the rest of the area to age.
Thank you. Jason.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to sort of step back a bit with the Sponge City talk and with elements of this talk. There's been saying that the dominant paradigm for hazard reduction has put us in a situation where the hazard has increased. And so I guess it's a pity we haven't got the professor from China here as well, but I want you to reflect or present on the idea that daring to think differently about the nature of the problem and the possible solutions might be one of the critical steps that we use, particularly in a university setting, rather than accepting the fundamentals of those dominant paradigms, whether they're fuel reduction or flood reduction.
Does anyone, Colleen, would you like to have a go at responding to that question?
I think COVID is yes. I think COVID provides some really interesting parallels, how you view this as a parallel for bushfires, is that prevention is always better, or early on is always better. And if you can get the environment really healthy, then you need less hospital intervention. And the unhealthier the system, the more you rely on the hospital. In a way, the advantage I see of being able to identify lightning ignitions straight away fits in with Phil's idea, is that you can, if you say this is close to being 50 years old and I really, really want to keep fire out, you can use it strategically to target areas that you want to save. And so it's about strategy and tactics. It provides you, you don't go to the first one that you see, you can start to strategize across the landscape. You're not going to get 100 that happen all at once, but you can start to think about what you want to save and how you can manage it. It's that intervention at the critical stage. Yeah.
Rob, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I'd add to that is the reality of the catastrophic fire conditions that we've had a few times should be put in context, in the sense that some of the really bad fires have occurred in these catastrophic periods, and those catastrophic periods occur more commonly because of climate change. But there hasn't been one in 3 years. There won't be one this year, right, because of La Nina. And actually they are quite rare. What we need, though, is to recognise that while existing management techniques work most of the time, during those catastrophic periods, they don't, right? And we need the technology to be able to deal with that, because we lost 30% of the Blue Mountains in the last fire, sort of thing. And so, you know, in those times, you really do need to throw technology at it. And the rest of the time, you need to be careful and considerate about how you manage. And then I 100% agree with the comments here that, you know, there's absolutely no reason to go out and try and put out a lightning strike if it's in the mountains at the moment, right? I mean, it'll just put itself out over time. And
So I'm going to ask a related question now from Ian Brown online. And Ian's asked, public and political understanding of bushfire and risk management is very limited, that this is crippling the capacity to develop evidence-based policy and responses. This places high-profile, in inverted commas, combat agencies in a powerful but not always impartial position as knowledge holders and policy advisors. Is this okay? If not, what can be done to improve the situation? That's a very long question. I don't know if my panel got the whole question, but if any of them did, would you like to respond?
I mean, I think there's a natural political process in anything, right? I mean, we're seeing it in all sorts of issues in Australia, and crisis management and disaster management is one of them. All we can do is continue these sort of activities and public discussions and work on changing public perception. I think it's a process that we need to engage in, and it's important as researchers, I guess I'd say, that you do engage in the publicity side of things for these sort of critical areas.
I suppose all I would add to that is I think it's important to create a separation between the people who are tasked with implementing action on the ground and the people who oversee that or provide the research backing for that, because it is very, very easy to have a conflict of interest where if you have those political forces that determine this is what must be done. For example, X hectares must be burnt. It's very easy then, and the pressure then for an agency tasked with doing that is to provide funding to research, for example, that will help them get that job done, as opposed to research that might ask harder questions.
Yeah, I guess if I can jump in again, I put up a slide about the goals of the Centre of Excellence. And one of the key things there was that it's not our job to pick winners, and it's not our job to put out technology. Our job is to demonstrate potential of technology and to evaluate performance. So it's really important as an academic that you step back from the decision. You know, you have your own opinions. Don't bring those opinions into your professional work, right? And open source your stuff. There's sorry, I'm getting passionate now. There's all these companies out there that see billions of dollars to be made over the next 20 years by rolling out technology, right? We have them coming through the door of the Centre of Excellence every month. So you cannot partner with these companies, because what they will do is tie up the IP. And if they tie up the IP, they will not let it out. And then other companies won't be able to do it. And Australia's a federation. It's always going to be different companies in different states. So if your IP is tied up in one state, it won't be in the other state, right? Victoria and New South Wales will never use the same company to provide the same service, right? They'll always choose a different company. You must make your research open source, you know, like the model that you produced that, you know, anybody can use. It's got to be out there. Sorry, I really care about that. That's one of the things that's really important. Yeah.
So we have a question here from Jennifer Taylor, who says, thanks for a great presentation. I was wondering whether the governance frameworks for the widespread deployment of sensors, cameras, and low-cost disposable technologies, etc., also accounts for the eventual disposal of these technologies in sustainable ways, for example, through retrieval, repurposing, or recycling of associated e-waste.
So this is a question that we've really considered carefully. So when you drop something in the bush, obviously it's waste. And there's a number of elements of that. It's very early in our technology demonstration to actually tackle those questions carefully. There's always a balance in these sort of questions. So it's something that we're very aware of. It's not something that we've put a lot of research into at the moment, apart from thinking a little bit around, for instance, the water gliders would be made out of cardboard. Some of the parts would be made out of recyclable plastic, but you know, if you're going to put a GPS in it, it's going to have some electronics in it, it's going to have a battery, and it's going to have a few bits and pieces like that. So we're aware of the problem. We haven't really thought about it carefully, and I guess my argument would be it's not our job to solve all of the problems. Our initial job is to demonstrate the capability.
Thanks, Rob. There's a question over here from the floor. Oh, apparently, last question.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So so this is a really, really important question that you've posed. The answer is not to build a command and control system, right? The answer is to get into standards, data standards, and communication standards, and to allow, Australia's a federation, so there's going to be lots of different providers playing in the same field. What we need is that the data and the products, the data products, the estimations of fire growth, the communication systems, they're all interoperable really, really easily, right? So you've got to let the natural socioeconomic structure of Australia go, with lots of different companies providing services in different places. What we're trying to do is get into standards, data standards, representations of data. How do you store it? Make sure as much as possible is open source and available, and try and enable an ecosystem of data that then means that lots of different companies can provide services that, you know, firefighters can use. So, you know, if the data standard is there, it doesn't matter whether it's an iPad or an iPhone. If a firefighter picks it up and the map looks the same and the data on it is the same, it doesn't matter what the product is. That's the sort of way that we're thinking about it. Now, we're still a bit naive, but super, super important question.
Should I be investing this for this at this point in time? How do I equate opportunities versus protect my forest versus my, how's that going to play out in the short and then the long term?
Yeah, look, what I might do, maybe we have a chat, because we're tight for time and it's a super deep question. So I think there's not quite enough time to give it fair go.
Okay, that is a really good question. I have misbehaved and we've gone over time. So I just would let all attendees know that the presenter slides will be made available after the event. And even more excitingly, the people that are in the room have a chance to go out and get some refreshments, but you must be back here at 5:10, which is in 15 or so minutes. Thank you. Thanks very much to our presenters.